Hello and welcome to my specialization introduction and outdoor content guide for the Arms Warrior in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth. If you haven't watched the primer video for this series, I suggest that you do that now. There'll be a link for it in the description below, and it will just help you understand, what's going on in this video. Alright. So we're in here on our warrior. We've got our action bars set up. If we hop into our talent tree, these are the talents you can select to fulfill the requirements that were laid out in the primer video. And now that we've got that all taken care of, we'll get into our spell book and start sorting our spells. Now I'm not going to go into each of these spells in depth, but I will give you a brief description about, generally what the spell does, and that should help you to understand why it's going into the category that it is going into. We're going to start off with Battle Shout. This is an ability that we're going to put in our combat utility area on the right hand side. Not because we're not going to use it very often. We want to have it going all the time, but just because it's an hour-long buff. So we want to put that over here and just remember, hey, make sure we have this. It will increase the attack power of us in the open world, as well as party members and raid members and stuff later on. Next, we have Berserker's Rage. This is a defensive cooldown we can use to remove any sort of fear, sapper, or incapacitate effects from us and make us immune for 6 seconds. We have Blade Storm. This is a big offensive cooldown that causes us to spin around and do a bunch of AoE damage. Charge is a combat utility ability that will cause us to charge towards the enemy and generate some of our primary resource. Colossus Smash is an ability that we're going to be using a lot, but it's going to go into our offensive cooldown section. It deals a big chunk of damage to our target and increases the damage we do to them. Die by the Sword is a defensive cooldown, increases our parry chance and reduces all damage that we take. Execute, we're going to put that in our combat utility section. We're going to be using it pretty frequently, but it's only usable on targets that have less than 20% health, and it'll deal a big chunk of damage to them when we do use it. Hamstring is an ability that will slow the opponent. That goes in our crowd control and CC. Heroic Leap will let us jump to a location up to 40 yards away. That's a combat utility ability. Heroic Throw also is a combat utility ability. This will let us throw our weapon at an enemy where we can, deal that last bit of damage to an enemy that's running away, or we can use it to pull an enemy over to us. Intimidating Shout is a crowd control ability that will cause enemies to cower in fear. It will also cause other enemies to be incapacitated. Mortal Strike is part of our core rotation. Overpower is part of our core rotation. Pummel is our interrupt that goes in our crowd control CC section. Rallying Cry is a defensive cooldown we can use that will increase the maximum health for us, party members, and raid members temporarily. Slam is part of our core rotation. Sweeping Strikes is an offensive cooldown we can use that will allow our single target abilities to hit 2 targets. Taunt is a combat utility ability with limited use. We can use it kind of like we would our Heroic Throw to get an enemy to come over to us, but we won't use it that often, so we'll put it over here on the right side as well. Victory Rush, this is part of our core rotation, and Whirlwind is part of our core rotation. So we have our spells all sorted out. Let's talk about the resources available to the Arms Warrior. The Arms Warrior has one resource, and it is Rage. You start combat with 0 Rage. You build Rage by dealing damage and taking damage. And you can build it all the way up to 100, and you'll spend it on abilities to deal more damage. So pretty simple cycle there. If we jump into the passive abilities of the Arms Warrior, we will see Deep Wounds. So Deep Wounds is an ability that will trigger off of some of the abilities we use in our core rotation, and we'll look at those and come back to this passive and make sure we know what they are. But essentially, as we deal damage, we put bleeds onto the enemy, which also deal damage. We have Seasoned Soldier, which our auto attack critical strikes will generate more rage, so we get more resources from our critical hits. And then Tactician is we have a percentage chance per rage we spend on damaging abilities to reset the remaining cooldown on one of our core rotation abilities. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. So that said, let's talk about what our core rotation is. Now, the core rotation for any warrior, optimally will start with charge, but you sometimes will be too close for charge, or charge will be on cooldown. It does have a 20-second cooldown, but the reason you want to start with charge is it does a little bit of damage, but it also will generate 20 rage right away that you can spend on abilities. So we'll talk about what you'll do if you can charge and what you'll do if you can't. So if you can charge in, you'll immediately have 20 rage. And with that 20 rage, you're going to want to go ahead and, let's see, we'll charge in. Boom, we've got a bunch of rage from that. We will want to start with Mortal Strike. Alright, so Mortal Strike is our key ability in ARMS. It does a nice chunk of damage to the target and reduces the effectiveness of healing on that target. Now that part isn't too big of a deal out in the open world, but it does do a nice big chunk of damage. So if we can't charge in and we can't generate that rage right away, then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to cast Overpower. So Overpower will be the ability that we use when we have no rage to help us generate some rage. Once we have generated some rage with Overpower, we will cast Mortal Strike right away. While Mortal Strike is on cooldown, we'll want to continue to spend our rage on other abilities, and we have two options. If we're facing one target, then we will cast Slam, and that will just deal damage to the target. If we're facing multiple enemies, then we will cast Whirlwind, and that will hit all targets in range. So, pretty simple. We're going to cast Overpower, right? So, Overpower does some damage to the enemy. This ability can't be blocked, dodged, or parried, and it will increase the damage of our next Mortal Strike by 20%, stacking up to 2 times. Now, the reason we want to get that Mortal Strike in right away is just for the damage to start the cooldown, because we do have potentially some ways to get the cooldown back on that, but we'll cast our Overpower. That's got a 12-second cooldown, so we'll go ahead and hit our Mortal Strike for the buff, and then we'll cast Slam, and Slam, and Slam, until our Mortal Strike comes off cooldown. We can hit that again, or if our Overpower is off cooldown, we'll hit that to buff our next Mortal Strike. So pretty simple, right? We've got our Overpower here. We hit our Mortal Strike, Overpower, Slam, Slam, Mortal Strike's off cooldown. We can hit that again, Overpower, Slam. If we're fighting a couple enemies, Whirlwind, Overpower, Mortal Strike, Overpower, Whirlwind. And that's pretty much all we want to do. Now note, you don't want to waste your Overpower. So in this case, we've got 2 stacks of Overpower. That's as high as it goes. So if we were to cast Overpower again, before we cast our Mortal Strike, we would waste a stack of that ability. So we want to cast our Overpower. We could save our Mortal Strike if we wanted to and just start slamming the target until our Overpower comes off cooldown. And then we can Overpower. We've got 2 stacks. And now we can Mortal Strike for 20% increased damage and go right back to Slam. So it depends on how much health your target has, right? If you're fighting a regular enemy, then I wouldn't worry too much about trying to get that exact rotation right. If you are fighting an elite or a rare spawn, then I would try my best to get 2 stacks of Overpower, then cast Mortal Strike, and not waste any charges of your Overpower. So there we go again. We got 2 stacks of Overpower, so we'll Mortal Strike again. And now you can see the graphic that's here on the side of the character. That is coming from our Tactician ability. So we have a % chance per rage spent on damaging abilities, and we're spending rage on Mortal Strike, Slam, and Whirlwind to reset the remaining cooldown on Overpower. So that's how we're able to get those stacks of Overpower, because normally we would hit that, wait 12 seconds, hit it, wait 12 seconds, and it would just take a long time to build up those 2 stacks so that we could Mortal Strike with the increased damage. But Tactician allows us the ability to get those stacks a lot quicker. So that's the basic rotation for the ARMS Warrior. If you're able to, go ahead and charge in. You can get your Mortal Strike, start casting your Overpower, Slam, Slam, We're going to overpower. We've got 2 stacks, so we can Mortal Strike and go right back into Slam. Overpower, let's say we're fighting a couple enemies, we Whirlwind instead. Overpower, 2 stacks. Mortal Strike. Whirlwind. And you can see there's some points here where we're kind of sitting around not generating rage. And that's really where our talents will start to come into play. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So we're going to jump into the talent tree and set up a build that is good for open world content. I'll get that set up here. All right. Okay. Alright, so this is the build that I recommend that you use in outdoor content. It's definitely not the only one you can use, but it's the one that I enjoy, I recommend, and I will be showing off at the end of the video. So we're going to go through each talent and talk about what it does and how it affects the build and why we picked it. So at our 15 tier, we have War Machine. Your auto attacks generate 10% more rage. As we saw, there were some points there where we were kind of low on rage. This will give us that extra 10% just from doing our auto attacks. Then also, killing an enemy will instantly generate 10 rage and increase our movement speed by 30% for 8 seconds. So this means we kill an enemy and we're able to move to the next enemy pretty quickly with some rage already on board, so we can, immediately start off with some mortal strikes or, whatever we want to do there. Next, we have double time. This increases the maximum number of charges on charge by 1 and reduces its cooldown by 3 seconds. So now we can charge more often, get that extra rage generation more often. Fervor of Battle, Whirlwind deals 10% increased damage and slams your primary target. So what this does is it essentially allows us to not even ever use Slam. We can actually move Slam up to a almost never used combat utility ability now and just stick to Whirlwind, because Whirlwind will slam our target anyway, our main target, while doing AoE damage. Now the reason you still want to keep an eye on Slam is because Whirlwind costs 30 rage, Slam costs 20. Sometimes you might be in a situation where you just need to hit something that's cheaper and you can go back and use Slam again, but in this case we're just going to Whirlwind pretty much all the time. Next, we have Bounding Stride. This reduces the cooldown on our heroic leap by 15 seconds, and every time we leap, we'll get 70% increased movement speed for 3 seconds. So, nice little boost to our mobility and helping us get around, and that's pretty important to warriors because outside of charging, heroic leap is about the only thing we can do to boost our speed. Next, we have Warbreaker. So, before we look at Warbreaker, let's go ahead and take a look at Colossus Smash. Now, I said that Colossus Smash was something you were going to want to use pretty often, even though we have it in the offensive cooldown section. And that's because whenever possible, you actually want to charge in and then Colossus Smash, because you'll do a ton of damage. This will generate a ton of rage, and then you'll get a boost of 30% damage for 10 seconds. So let's say that this was our target. We could charge in, Colossus Smash, get a bunch of rage, hit our Mortal Strike, overpower. Now we're hitting our Whirlwind, overpower, because that slams our target. Back to our Mortal Strike, Whirlwind, and that's essentially how that's going to work. So what does this talent do? Warbreaker replaces Colossus Smash. It keeps the same cooldown. It does all the same stuff, except now it hits everything around you and not just a single target. So this will boost your damage against all targets around you by 30%, making this a much more effective cooldown because you don't have to wait 45 seconds to use this on a single target. You can get a group of enemies together, smash this down, do a bunch of damage, get that damage boost, start doing your whirlwinds, and just, wrecking people. Next, we have Deadly Calm. This is an offensive cooldown ability. 1 minute cooldown, so we can use it pretty often, but it reduces the rage cost of our abilities by 100% for 6 seconds, which will let us spam a bunch of stuff really quickly. And if we're ever in a situation where we just want to kill something really fast, or we need to get out of a tricky situation, then we can hit Deadly Calm and use our rage cost abilities for free. So that's a nice, both offensive and potentially defensive ability that we get to add in there. And then finally, Anger Management. Every 20 rage you spend reduces the remaining cooldown on Warbreaker and Bladestorm by 1%. So, with that 45-second cooldown we have on Warbreaker, now every 20 rage we spend, we're going to reduce that by 1 second. As well as Bladestorm, which is a really strong offensive AoE ability that we can use with a 1.5 minute cooldown. So twice as long as Warbreaker, but we still get to bring that down by 1 second for every 20 rage we spend. So the idea with this build is that you're going to be going from enemy to enemy and constantly killing. And this is kind of hard to demonstrate on the target dummies because, one, you have Execute, right, which we put up here in our combat utility. When your enemy gets down to 20%, you can start casting Execute on the enemy to deal a ton of damage and finish them off. Well, you can't do that on the target dummy because they don't get low enough. Also, we have Victory Rush, which will strike the target, dealing some damage and healing you for a percentage of your maximum health, but you can only use this within 20 seconds of killing an enemy that gives you experience or honor. So this also gives you a free button to hit for some free damage, some free rage regeneration, and some healing, but you have to use it after you kill something. We can't kill the target dummy, so we can't show that off. So this build is going to make a little bit more sense in the demonstration when we get to that. But before we get there, we want to take a look at the PvP talents that are available in War Mode in case you do want to toggle this on and participate in PvE. These would be the best talents I think that you could take in order to do that. So first off, we have Relentless. This replaces your Honorable Medallion, gives you 20% duration reduction to any crowd control effects that hit you. So it's a nice set it, forget it, I don't have to think about it too much kind of ability that you can pick. After that, we have Shadow of the Colossus. Nice reference. Charge will reset the cooldown of Overpower, and Rage gain from Charge is increased by 15. So now, with this ability, instead of getting 20 Rage from Charge, we'll get 35. And if Overpower is on cooldown, because we were just killing an enemy or something, the cooldown will be reset so we can immediately hit Overpower. Next, Storm of Destruction. This reduces the cooldown on Bladestorm, which we talked about earlier, by 33%, and Bladestorm also now will apply Mortal Wound to all targets that you hit, which is that passive bleed ability that we talked about earlier. And finally, Death Sentence. Execute now has a 15-yard range, causing you to charge to targets when used. So if something happens to be running away from you, you'll be able to hit Execute and charge into it and deal that damage. So just kind of a nice little chase mechanic. If you're killing a bunch of things and you got one enemy running away, then you can hit this and charge over to it, deal a massive amount of damage, and save your actual charge of charge for the next enemy. So before we jump into the demonstration, let's revisit our deep wounds again. So Mortal Strike, Execute, and Bladestorm will inflict deep wounds, so that bleed that we do. Alright, so now that we've taken a look at the talents, the next thing to do is demonstrate the build. So I'm going to head out into the open world so I can show that off, and I will cut to that and see you there. Alright, so we're here in Suramar City, and we're just going to go down and take on a couple different types of enemies and kind of show off how the build works, show off some of the abilities we couldn't show on the target dummy as well. So let's go down here, and we're going to just pop over to this person, and we're going to charge in. Nope, she got too close to us, so we will Overpower, Mortal Strike, Whirlwind, and Dead. Alright, so this guy, we will charge over. We'll cast our Victory Rush. We'll go ahead and Mortal Strike, Overpower. We can hit our Whirlwind. We got our free overpower here. We can whirlwind again. We make sure we use our victory rush. Got our free overpower, whirlwind, overpower. So we've got our 2 stacks for our mortal strike again. So let's go over to this guy. We could use our heroic leap, jump over to him. Boom, there we go. Use our victory rush, mortal strike. Same thing, we'll target this guy. We can charge over. Victory rush. Alright. In this AoE situation, we can whirlwind. We got another victory rush. This guy's going to be able to execute him because he's below the threshold there. Charge over again. You can see how this is a pretty effective build. Now, what you're going to want to do in an AoE situation is you're going to want to make sure, let's grab some of these people here, see what we can get. Charge over to him. Alright, we got a few people here. We'll do a heroic throw. Drag all these guys over here. So we're going to hit Warbreaker, right? Use our victory rush. Whirlwind. Okay, we got a free overpower. Use our victory rush again. Mortal strike. Got our victory rush there from killing that guy. So whirlwind, mortal strike, whirlwind. We're going to want to use our overpowers here. There we go. So we got 2 stacks of overpower. We use our mortal strike, overpower. Now we start just using our whirlwind to get rid of rage, and we can execute. Alright. So we took some damage there, and that's perfectly fine. A lot of that was me just not moving out of the spells because I wanted to make sure I was covering the different things that I was doing here. But you can see if we charge in here, we can use our victory rush, and that gives us a nice chunk of health back. Alright, so let's go see if we can find an elite. We do have a rare spawn right above us. There we go. Alright, so we'll go over here. So on these guys, you know, I'm not too worried about them dealing a lot of damage to me, so I could actually just, you know, spam Whirlwind here and use my victory rushes in between, and we're good to go. Alright, so let's say I did want to use, you know, some offensive cooldowns over here. A lot of the Arms Warrior offensive cooldowns are actually more focused on multiple target, but we can use them on single target. So we could charge in here, use Victory Rush. We got our Blade Storm we could use. Hit our Overpower. We could cast our Deadly Calm, so all of our rage stuff will be free. And there we go. Alright. So that's it. That's the build. Essentially, you'll want to use Warbreaker as much as you can. Once you get used to the core rotation over here, it's perfectly fine to go ahead and move Warbreaker over and use that as much as possible. If you want to pull down Execute and put that on there as well, you know, it's really up to you how you organize everything, but these are the main abilities that you want to be worried about when you're going from enemy to enemy in an open world situation. So I hope this has helped you to understand the Arms Warrior a little bit and given you the confidence to get on your own warrior, get out there in the open world and start trying it out and see if this is a specialization you'd be interested in playing in Battle for Azeroth. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell, blah, 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 all this. I hope you have a good time in Battle for Azeroth, and thank you for watching.